Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. Now, we're spoilt with another international guest. So David, aka Dynamite D, has come on the pod today. So thank you, David, for your time, first of all.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We've had some really stellar conversations kind of on the back end that people don't get to see. So it's going to be fun kind of diving into some topics that you've actually wanted to talk about with me that we haven't talked about yet on the back end. So it'll be fun to kind of bring it to light. I'm an open book, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, when you shared it on your story, when I tagged you, it can be quite a messy subject per se, because there's so much that surrounds masculinization, virilization, mainly the lack of education, I would say, as to, PED use in general, but what the side effects are. And I see this a lot. And as I've told you, it's a real mission of mine to increase the awareness for people that are going down this route. Is it the right decision in the first place? What are your actual goals? And then to have the risks versus rewards and make an informed decision rather than just, like I said to you, pop down the gym and pop some Anavar as an example.
Yeah, I like calling it a messy subject because it can literally end up with messy outcomes. And on top of it, every single person is going to be different. So I can't say, do one thing and you're going to have the same outcome every single time. I can say do one thing and you're going to have 10 different outcomes because your throttle mechanisms are so much more susceptible as a woman. Like if you just look at a woman's hormones, you guys are producing so much more than a male. Males are mainly predominantly producing androgens, whereas women are mainly producing estrogens and progesterones rather than the other way around. So your throttles are just massive. When you pull on one, it pulls on the other. So it's a teeter-totter system.
Yeah, and I don't think that really a lot of people that do go down this route would even consider that, because they maybe don't know, and that's not necessarily someone's fault. But I always say, if you are looking to go assisted, if you're going to use PEDs, then get a coach that knows what they're talking about, do your research, and start to get an understanding into what that does entail, and also I'm sure you'll agree, there is like the safer use model, where
Sure.
you can use multiple compounds on a smaller dosage than what you'd maybe assume that you'd need to take to facilitate muscle growth and fat loss and whatever else you're taking them for.
Yeah, I actually was the one that invented this saying, and I've only taught it to two of my mentees actually in the past. And it was vertical versus horizontal stacking. You can either go vertically and start building upon your dosing, or you can go horizontally and stack based off of mechanisms of actions and what you're trying to accomplish. And there's very smart ways to stack certain things together. And you have your bioidenticals, and then you have your synthetics. Obviously, they're all synthetic to a degree, they're exogenous hormones. However, at the end of the day, you can lean into certain things without having to have as much risk. And it's all about risk versus reward in this sport, and understanding that there is a risk that comes in with the sport for sure.
Yeah, and of course, if you do it with an informed decision, there is females out there that the virilization process, they know about it and they want to progress their physique to a level that, that may well happen, and it probably is going to happen. And that's a decision for them. And also, I feel like there's sometimes a little bit of that, I don't know, maybe opinions floating around that. And it's like, if that's the athlete's decision, then, who's to stop them?
And that's absolutely correct. I mean, once you hit a certain threshold where it sounds so bad, but
Mm.
you hit a certain threshold where you hit an androgenic use, and the woman you can treat like a man,
Yeah.
because that's where your androgenic dosages go to. And so you completely flip flop on how you look at things, and you start stacking similar to a man rather than a female. And if that's what they want to do, that's their personal decision. For my coaching methodologies and my moral values, I just don't go down that route. I'm all for going down a smart route, but I feel like least effective dosage, the most effective dosage at the least amount, is going to get you to your goals. And usually it actually brings a better look to stage anyways. It's a very crisp look, even with men too. So this is something that's becoming more prevalent within the higher tier of coaching, not all high tier coaches, but most high tier coaches, where I just did a post on diet and training rather than the emphasis of drug use. And it's a massive shift that a lot of these top coaches are already figured it out. And everyone thinks that these top coaches have some magic formula. And the magic formula is they've gotten smarter and smarter with their approaches. There are some out there that are quite the opposite. Don't get me wrong, that are at the top of the game for sure. But I'm telling you right now, the ones that are like I personally am friends with that are producing over and over again are much lower than people think on their dosings, and their women are staying feminine. They're not having issues, and they can stay in the game as long as they can, as long as you can get them to a nice level basis after they're coming off of everything.
Yeah, because of course, in all phases of bodybuilding, like you say, it's an extreme sport. It's not just that dieting phase that's labeled as extreme if people are really committing to the growth phase as well. And of course, if you're using PEDs, that goes across all of the phases. And I always think, you know, when I went down the assisted route, it was like, am I ready to commit to that? Because like you're labeling there, the sort of fundamentals, diet, nutrition, but then adding, you know, going down that assisted route, it's pinning every day, it's making sure you do that, making sure you source that, all of these things that actually add more complexities. And if you're not already nailing the basics, I would definitely question whether you should go down this route.
Yeah, I like talking about the mathematical formula. If you're not at 100%,
Yeah.
what multiplier are you going to put in there that's going to make it over 100%? And it's actually nothing if you talk about it from a mathematical standpoint. But if you're at 100%, well, you can probably get to 110%, 120%, and that mathematically actually makes sense. And that's very realistically what it should be.
And when you do like a consult with someone, if someone was coming to you to start using PEDs, would you start that process of going, right, let's look at diet, let's look at your training and all of those things first, and then make sure it's the right decision for them?
Yeah, you always want to start with a baseline, no matter who it is, even if they're a person that's already been enhancing.
Mhm.
Me personally, like I'll drop them down to a baseline. If they're a male and they're enhancing, I want to pull them back down to tier T immediately. And I want to see how much progress I can make. And most of these guys make tons of progress in a very short period of time. And then when it comes to women, I just optimize their menstrual cycle. And I'm like, look, you might not need anything at all. Like, look at how much progress you're making. Your dieting down phase is going to be completely different because you're going to be healthy. You optimize your gut, and then your nutrient partitioning is better. If your gut's shot, how
Yeah.
are you going to increase muscle protein synthesis if you're having issues with just nutrient absorption in the first place? So things like that, optimizing the liver, that makes it able to actually convert hormones properly, because hormones are all cholesterol. Well, sex hormones are cholesterol and they're modulated in the liver. So the fundamental piece is cholesterol in the liver getting converted into different hormones, and then it pathways all the way down, and that's steroidogenesis. So everyone skips the biologics piece and they go straight to the pharmacologic piece, and they miss the memo, because when you come off, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot and you're not going to make progress. And that's why you see all these guys that like blow up and then shrink down and then blow up and then shrink down. And then with women, you see them blow up and then all of a sudden they have like muscle atrophy. And it's because their hormones aren't coming back online. At least a male is usually on testosterone replacement therapy to maintain some muscle tissue. But the women are just like, we're hitting a show. We're dieting down hard. We're shooting your thyroid in the foot. You're completely downregulating all your sex hormones. And then you come off of everything. Your thyroid's still shot. Your nutrient partitioning is shot. Your gut's shot. And next thing you know, like you see like your glutes slowly diminish away. Like usually with women, you see their glutes. It's either there's only fat being stored and your glutes are coming down. And that's literally it. So the whole key is, when you come off, get your hormones to an optimal position as quickly as possible so that you can continue to make progress coming out of it. And that's why reverses, everyone's like, oh, I got so big out of the reverse. No, you stored a lot of water and glycogen, and your thyroid hopefully is upregulating fast enough, or else you can't even utilize those nutrients that you're feeding in the first place. That's why a slower reverse I do like, but I do obviously increase super quickly, because if not, someone's just going to binge eat from a psychological standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rabbit hole in itself, reversing out, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think, you know, a lot of the guests come on and we do end up talking about this because it's a crazy, crazy time and there's no real right or wrong per se. But of course, our job as coaches is to try and guide the way as much as possible and facilitate that structure. But of course, allowing people to maybe immerse in some family stuff and some things outside of bodybuilding per se.
Absolutely. So I guess let's jump into the messy subject now that you wanted to jump into to begin with.
So I guess a good place to start would be what virilization actually is, because I do have a lot of first timers listen. I also have natural athletes listen, and you know, people do DM me saying I'm considering going down the assisted route, and of course I direct them to their coach, but maybe they wouldn't really even know that this is a thing. So this would be good to maybe talk about what it is.
Sure. So virilization is just a terminology that is the masculinization of women. So it's feminine. feminine women slowly masculinizing over time. And I want to reiterate that this does not happen overnight. It happens over time. This might not be the first cycle, might not be the second cycle, it might not be the fifth cycle, but that sixth cycle, maybe you start virilizing. So it's the buildup over time. And one major piece of this variable is I like just simple math, right? I like KISS, keep it stupid simple. Androgens over time equal side effects. So from a mathematical standpoint, let's just use Anavar, for example. If you're taking 5 milligrams of Anavar over an 8-week period of time, that's equivalent to taking 10 milligrams of Anavar over a 4-week period of time. Now, from an exponential standpoint, though, on a mathematical standpoint, it may be a little bit different, because if your 5 milligrams of Anavar is accruing more muscle tissue over this time, so you're 4 weeks in and now you have more muscle tissue than you did at 10 milligrams, or let's say 6 weeks in, you have more muscle tissue than the 10 milligrams of Anavar 4 weeks in. Well, now you can utilize actually probably more of that Anavar binding to that androgen receptor sites. So it actually compounds up a little bit quicker than you think, and it becomes this exponential return on your investment, where the longer you can stay cycled up, the more return on your investment you're going to get. This is why I really like titration. And titration is where you slowly increase dosing over time. You get a lot of really good biofeedback when you're doing this, which includes like side effects, like where is your side effect threshold? When are you going to hit a side effect threshold? When is your vocal cord changes? Well, first, test to make sure your gear is real. I always recommend, okay, let's just jump into I recommend Roid Test Kit. Roid Test Kit, like literally just Google Roid Test Kit and it's going to come up. It's literally that's the name of it. And it's pretty accurate. Someone tried to dock me on Reddit saying it didn't work. Absolutely not. Now, I will say that there are some fillers, like if they're capsulated, that some of these people do use. And I've heard, like I've seen false negatives where like it's real, but it's pulling back a false negative. And I actually can't even read as anything that would make sense. So that is one thing that may make it come back false. However, if it's like true, pure, whatever it is, it'll at least tell you if it's real or not. It won't tell you if the dosing is right. And I'll tell you right now, UGL stuff is not going to be dosed properly. Like 0% of the time is it going to be 100% dosed properly. And that's just a fact. So if you can get it through a compounding pharmacy or a pharmaceutical source, especially in the US, it's not the most difficult thing to get. With how the system's currently set up, that may change when the DEA come into it, which, the DEA is slowly coming in. They're just trying to figure out the laws and regulations behind it. It's still going to be legalized. However, how you get prescribed it may be a little bit more difficult. So anytime you can get real. And that's kind of that. So it's basically compound interest over time. And when do you get the side effects? And the very common side effects that you'll see with virilization, usually within women, is not really vocal cord changes. Sometimes it is, but usually not. I would say facial hair growth is a very common one, acne, and then a less common one that can happen with some women, and it depends on your conversion, is going to be potential male pattern balding. And this definitely will not happen your first time. This will happen over time. If it happens your first time, it's usually a thyroid issue more than a hypothyroidism where your thyroid's just downregulated too much. And the way you know if it's androgenic versus thyroid related is if you're losing hair on the side of your head, not just the top. So male pattern balding goes from basically the back into the crown, whereas on the side of the head is where you're going to have thyroid. So it's going to be your full head if it's thyroid.
And when you talk through, if you're going down this route with someone, would you talk to them in this, depth as much as possible with the risk of virilization, or would you say your dosing is less so and it's because it's in a more controlled way, or do you always go through this with them?
I think everyone should have this fundamental understanding anyways. Worst comes to worst, they at least know what could happen. And it's just weaponizing people with the right information, I think, more so than anything else. Now, I haven't had women virilize. I have had women who have had virilization issues. Now, acne is very easily resolved, and usually it's actually gut related, not androgen related. Very uncommonly is it, but it very well can happen. The other one that's very common is hair growth. Now, that is a virilization side effect that is super, super common. I mean, it's just like a male with higher natural testosterone levels. They're probably gonna, yeah, exactly. They're probably going to grow a beard. Like I was in 7th grade with a beard. I naturally had high testosterone for sure. So it's one of those things where you have to weigh the risk and reward there.
Mm.
And I would say that in lower dosing, some of these lower dosages that I would recommend anyways, well, recommend, right? Like I'm not recommending anything. I literally do not recommend anything, but like 2.5 milligrams of 5 milligrams of Anavar, you can run that for a very long period of time, most likely without having many side effects.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is, of course, if someone's listening and they've maybe had this conversation with their coach and none of this has been gone through, then it's always for me to almost remind someone to say, I always say this on the pod, and all of the guests back me up. If you're paying for a service from a coach and you ask a question and you're given a I don't know or I don't want to talk about that, then perhaps it's worth looking at a different coach, because this is serious. If you're going down this route and virilization does occur, then if you're left on your own and you're in this place where you can't reverse that, you're going to feel pretty fucked. And it's really unfair that this happens. But of course, this industry, no one looks in on it. No one looks in on coaches. There's a lot of coaches that would do their own thing. And I just think it's so important that people understand that they do have a right to ask these questions.
So this is my challenge for every single athlete out there is if you ask a coach a what, and they don't have an answer of a why or a how or any type of logical reasoning behind it where they can't explain something, they don't know what they're talking about. And that's just a matter of fact. If they're not mentoring you, so they don't have to go into mechanism of action or any of this other stuff. However, they should be able to tell you what it's going to do, why they would even recommend it,
Yeah.
and what the side effects are, which that should be the first thing talked about is like, hey, this could potentially happen. And if it scares you out the wazoo, it's probably not for you because those risks are very real. And I have seen 10 milligrams of Anavar change a woman's voice 2 times over my lifespan of coaching. These women were sick beforehand and they were recommended not to do anything, and they decided to do it on their own. And within a very short period of time, their vocal cords change. And vocal cord changing, when it happens, there's usually a short timetable to reverse it. However, if it changed and then it went back and then it changed again, it's probably not coming back. It's probably going to stay elongated, because essentially what happens with the vocal cords is when a male is going through puberty, I'm going to use a male as an example for the women out there.
Yeah.
When a male goes through puberty, you start hearing their voice crack. When their voice is cracking, it's actually the vocal cords elongating. So when you add androgens and your vocal cords start to elongate, the same thing happens as a male goes through puberty. When they elongate, that's literally a muscle that's elongating. The only way to get that fixed is either you practice vocal cord practice, which there's a transgender woman actually on YouTube that I thought was a woman the whole time. That's really, really good to learn from. And you can change your pitch or practice a higher pitch, and you would never know the difference. The other thing, the only physical way to change that back is you get vocal cord surgery where they actually cut the vocal cords and they tighten it back down. And there is actually one study that I've seen where a woman got the surgery. There were no change. It was a woman bodybuilder. I think she was like 15 years into bodybuilding or 17 years, something like that, almost 2 decades. She got the vocal cord surgery, and after 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden her vocal cords like changed back to what they were originally.
Oh,
So it wasn't overnight.
yeah. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, there's another study I've seen where the vocal cords actually did go back. They tightened back down over time, but it was through vocal cord practice that the vocal cord started to tighten down, which because it's a muscle, so you can train it to go back to a certain position to a degree, right? But it's so elongated at.
Yeah, for sure. I guess there's also merit in, if this starts to happen, I've heard of an app that you can like test your voice. I don't know if you use that as well, and it's something that you can use over time.
Yeah, there is an app. I always forget the name of the app, but I was actually told Jared Feather was the one that actually brought it to light for me. I didn't even hear about the app, and I just haven't had issues with it with my women. Like I don't have any virilization that happens with my women because I'm so methodical with my approaches. And I get track record of athletes in the off season, and there's a very good reason. And we can jump into like why I would start in the off season rather than an on season.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this.
Sure. Okay. So the major issue with getting a tracker, as much as I would love to only use it in an on season, especially for a first time use, because you're just going to hyper respond to anything that you would take.
Yeah.
In an off season, when you're taking an exogenous hormone, a sex hormone, like an Anavar, let's just use as an example, because that's going to be the most common one.
Yeah, for sure.
So Anavar is going to downregulate your ovarian to pituitary axis way. So it's going to hit that axis way. When you're dieting down for a show and using heavy stimulant use and constantly taxing your body nonstop, it's also going to downregulate your adrenal axis way as well, which your adrenals produce a lot of hormones. So on a woman, you're talking about 50% of adrenals production, which is mainly going to produce your androgens for the most part.
Yeah.
But it does produce hormones nonetheless. And then your ovaries produce the other 50% of your hormones. So when you're hitting both at the same time on season, it's very hard to get a track record of how resilient is that ovarian to pituitary axis way, which is going to downregulate from androgen. So a lot of women, when they're just dieting down for show, even naturally, you just see a menstrual cycle go offline. And it has to do with, one, you're dieting down really hard. It's probably going to hit both at the same time anyways, because it's high stress environment. And when you go put yourself into a high stress environment, you're definitely going to tax your adrenals, and your ovarian to pituitary axis way can eventually get taxed from being in lower fat percentages over time, especially since you store estrogen predominantly in fat tissue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes it's definitely underrated, and there is mixed messages. This is something I've delved into a little bit more. Now, I guess I'm more seeing other bodybuilders and how other people prep as the example of dieting down hard. It's a very mixed bag when you meet other competitors. There's a lot of still out there where it's like diet hacks and making it easy and all of this stuff. And I don't know about in the US, but I feel like sometimes it's almost strayed away from what a prep is. To me, it's like going to prep and it's you dig till the end and you know you get on stage and you have that achievement. But yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag over here. I don't know what it's like over there.
The best coaches in the world have gotten smarter over time with their training and their dieting. So again, I'm going to lean into more of the training more than anything, or sorry, the dieting more than anything else. There are ways to prevent thyroid downregulation to the best of your ability. In fact, I found thyroid hormone being needed a lot less the better that I've gotten at coaching and dieting people down. Their physiques look better. On stage, they look more full. The fill out is better. You're constantly sensitizing and putting glycogen into the muscle tissue if you're doing refeeds properly. Might take a little bit more time. However, the athlete's usually going to feel better. The training is not going to get taxed as much. And most of my athletes are getting 1 to 2 refeeds a week. Now, their food might be low on a daily basis, but they're getting 1 to 2 refeeds per week, preventing that thyroid downregulation to the best of my ability. That's just what I find pretty effective. Now, there is some very good points in time. I have a figure athlete I can use as an example right now. I decided to flip into a straight linear drop. This was 7 days ago. She went from dropping, I think it was 4 pounds total over the last like 6 weeks or so. Now she was growing into the show. Almost 100% of my athletes grow into the show. When androgens are involved, it expands muscle tissue. Does that mean that means that your DEXA scan is going to look ridiculous if you do it like before and after? Like if you just implement androgens, you store more skeletal muscle glycogen. And that alone, it's bigger, faster, stronger. Like it literally makes the cells bigger, faster, stronger. Essentially, is like the easiest way to think about it. So I dropped her into a linear 7 days ago where I just stopped refeeding. She's literally down 8 pounds in 7 days. And I asked, I'm like, mentally, can you handle going without a refeed? How's your performance? And she's squatting over 225 pounds for reps. And, you know, she's a little bit of a freak. But I want to push to win an overall show at a national show. And that's just where she is. She is a champion. She's an athlete, and at the end of the day, that's what it's going to require to get someone down. It's not just drugs. Now, drugs can obtain a certain look, and there's no doubt in my mind there's a physiological look that comes to PEDs that you cannot get otherwise. Does that mean you can't turn pro naturally? Absolutely not. I've known Olympians that were natural, and people are going to DM me and be like, oh, who are the Olympians? I'm not going to say who they were because that's private information, but
Yeah.
I know Olympians, I know male Olympians also, not in just men's physique, men's classic. I know one in particular off the top of my head who was literally natural on the Olympia stage. And I think that that is just a reality check for everyone else. If you have good genetics, you can make it very, very, very far, even to the top stage in the world. The lower the muscle tissue that is required, the further you can go. Don't let genetics be the limiting factor mentally. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because I was always told I had garbage genetics. I was 19 years old. I was 135 pounds. I got up to 217 pounds naturally in 3 years. It's those people that are saying that are putting you down, they're going to be standing in the same spot or a worse position in life when you're constantly progressing. And that aspect of bodybuilding that's beautiful is the discipline, consistency, and reward that is going to pay off long term, not short term, at the end of the day. So keep consistent and just grind, and you're going to hit these plateaus and you're like, I'm not making any progress. And you compare your pictures from 3 months before to now, or 6 months before, be like, wow, I'm making progress. Especially as a natural, that was the most frustrating thing for me. It felt like it always came in waves. It like would come in like big waves for me, especially in the beginning, where I'd be like, dang, I'm growing fast. And now I would say that I hit a second round of puberty when I was going like around 19 years old, where I don't know if I was having a massive growth hormone spike or what was going on, but I got big really quickly. Now I always had a wide clavicle structure, like bone structure didn't really change that much. I will say that my actual facial structure did change a little bit, not a ton, but that also happened with dieting down for bodybuilding shows over time. And I started losing fat in my face. So I like have a chronic diet face now.
Hey, I love diet face. When that starts to go, I'm like, I look like a hamster. I don't like this. But I do, I resonate so much with what you just said there about that consistency and then that reward being getting to stand on stage. And I think that's sort of where I was going with that. I think that sometimes because bodybuilding is so available now, like you go on Instagram, right? And it's like, this is cool. I'll try this. And I think sometimes it maybe strays away from what I would see as what bodybuilding is, you know, embracing that. Like, I love prep. I love sucking it up, and you get so much from that. And you touched on there about mentally, you know, the mental evolution, the depths that you go to. It's super cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I can actually tie kind of the PED aspect and the mental aspect together
Yeah.
from a women's standpoint, because this is what this podcast is all about right now. So when you introduce androgens, one, when you're dieting down, if you ever know the creation of Buddhism, it was basically a prince. He went to the streets and he basically starved himself until he almost died. Gandhi did something very similar, and they had religious enlightenment. I've been sitting on a toilet at nighttime trying to poop dust out and falling asleep on the toilet and having conversations with God or something like that. That life-changing experiences, and very eye-opening, but you also have to delineate what's a positive aspect and what's a negative aspect, and not make life-changing decisions while you're in a prep, because you will have a lot of conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
Stimulant use is going to be high.
Yeah.
Androgens are involved. Let's go into this piece. Androgens are involved. It's going to change your mental aspect even more. And as a woman, when you introduce androgens, it literally changes your personality type in the sense where you start to metabolize things like cortisol differently. A major aspect of a male versus a female at a natural level is males produce more androgens than women. When you introduce androgens and the higher amounts of androgens that you go with women, the faster you start acting like a male, whether it be sex drive going up. That could be one thing. Another thing is you might want to drive your car faster. You might get pissed off at people faster. Why? Well, your androgens are increased. Do you know how a male is responding to bad drivers on the road now? That might be one thing. So the major personality difference that you see between a man and a woman at a natural level is a man, especially as they get older, they like driving faster cars. They like doing more reckless things just to experience that adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
Women don't have that. Women are more comforting. They're more subtle. They get stressed out easier on a day in the life. Like if they have a bad day at work, it carries on into the next day, sometimes 2 or 3 days. Sometimes it never leaves you because you have another bad day and then another bad day. Next thing you know, your cortisol levels keep building up, and it's compound interest. And the higher your androgens are, well, you metabolize that cortisol faster, your adrenaline faster, and it literally will change how you respond on a day in the life. You'll notice that the women that are taking higher amounts of androgens or that are on androgens completely start changing, and it's nothing against them. It is just a natural personality change and the metabolism of cortisol, mainly, well, adrenaline maybe for the most part. So I think that's super interesting that no one really talks about. It has to do with comp T and MAO, and there are a lot of women out there that have started taking like MAO inhibitors and stuff like that. I will let you know that if you start taking something like an MAO inhibitor, a really popular one right now is methyl blue or methylene blue. You have to be very careful with stimulant use because you metabolize cortisol slower, actually. So, but implementing androgens, maybe that's something that makes sense. But if you're taking something like an Adderall, well, guess what? You need to stay away from MAO inhibitors because it's extreme stress to the heart more so than anything else. So that's just something I want to talk on, was like the socialistic aspect of androgen use. And from a masculine standpoint, it literally will change you more into acting more like a male.
Yeah. And actually, I had this conversation with my partner about, he started using Tren in a diet phase. And I spoke to my coach about it because he's used it. And I said, are there things like mood swings that you'd experience? And it's like the detrimental effects on sleep, stuff like this. And I spoke to my coach about it. Then we had a conversation. And it was like, actually, I think sometimes if your partner is going to use PEDs, that there's maybe more merit in these types of conversations. Exactly what you just said there. Imagine someone that's got into the sport and their partner knows nothing about bodybuilding, and then suddenly they exhibit these behaviors. But I've never heard someone say, oh, do you speak to your partner about it? And actually, I think maybe there's a bit of merit in that being a bit more of a joint decision. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so Tren is a really unique one, and that's usually the one that you hear from the women partner versus about the male partner. Be like, I never want them using Tren again.
Yeah.
And the really interesting thing about Tren is, one, everyone's like, oh, it was never. Funny thing is, it was never legalized for human consumption. Well, that's not true. In fact, it was legalized in France for 2 years, and it was called Parabolin in France when it was legalized. That was the pharmaceutical name for it. It was legalized for women. I would highly recommend no women to ever touch Tren. There's really no reason for it. They pulled it from the market within 2 years for a very good reason. Now, yeah, and it was high dosage. Like the dosage that they were actually scripting with the loading phase was actually what I used for my 8 weeks of prep last time. And usually I only use 6 weeks because it's neurotoxic. So it is actually truly neurotoxic. There are direct renal impacts from Tren, which we know about. On top of this, I relate Tren on a man to a woman's menstrual cycle. Women turn into very emotional human beings 3 days before their period, every single month. Why is that? The increase in prolactin production. So prolactin makes you extremely emotional. And once you realize this, you realize, oh, Tren makes me feel this way. Women get very emotional right before their period. Well, that's one way that a man can relate to a woman. And it's like, oh, they have to go through this every single month. Wow. So that's a really interesting correlation there. And also, like, definitely like on the male aspect, less is definitely more when it comes to it. It can actually mellow people out. For me, actually, when I use it, it actually mellows me out. It helps actually with your corticoid receptor or your basically cortisol and stress receptor in the kidneys, to actually bring down cortisol. Most anabolic steroids actually bring down cortisol, not bring it up, which is something that most people don't talk about. So it can actually help with stress management. But if someone's adrenals are in a really bad spot when you start androgenic use, well, it can have quite the opposite, because if you zero out your cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone. It's probably the most important hormone actually to the human body, because if you don't produce enough cortisol, you'll have a heart attack and you can die.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I felt like when Matt went on to Tren, he actually became very like in the moment and very chilled. And I was like, I'm expecting you to be like humping my leg if I was listening to everyone else.
Well, I will tell you right now, the sex drive definitely goes through the roof
And
on
that
Trent
came
in
on. Yeah,
particular.
and that came.
Yeah, it's like a breeze rolls in. It's like the song Jizz in My Pants, where like a breeze rolls in kind of thing. It's like why is this going on? The only time you're using it is when you're in prep also. You have no energy at all. It's like even if you get an erection, you're just like, "Oh, cool, that's really annoying. I'm glad something still exists down there because I have no energy to have sex right now."
Yeah, and it's like, again, another communication with your partner. I think that, if your partner's not doing bodybuilding and they don't get it, even for females, when we're in prep towards the tail end particularly, it's having a conversation that actually you do still love them, if you do, and you just haven't got the energies. I mean, we spoke about the mental epiphanies you have. Like, often people do gravitate away from relationships and these things happen, but if you do still love them and you care for them, maybe telling them. And I think this is important as well for the listeners, that explaining that to your partner, because they're just as much going through the prep with you. If you're living with someone, and they do feel neglected, and that's tough.
Absolutely. That's the most important part of any relationship, even including with your coach, is communication. So if something feels off, communicate it with your coach. Don't hit up another coach and be like, "Hey, is this normal?" If your coach should definitely be telling you if that's right or not.
Yep, amen. Like, I do speak to people, and I always say, like I said near the start, please speak to your coach, because for me it's that, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, and also, when you're working with someone as a coach, yourself, I personally want to know my athlete's body. I want to know everything. I'm like, tell me more. Don't hold it back, especially in prep. And there's going to be a lot of people listening that are in prep. And of course, all of everything that goes into that. Earlier, you spoke about stimulant use, and that could be something we could delve into as well, because we're talking about PEDs, and I think maybe the mood swings and things that you can expect from stimulant use. If someone has got a coach and they haven't explained this, maybe we could touch on that.
Yeah, so let's go into the PED aspect of stimulant use. So the most common PEDs you're going to see with women are probably Anavar and clenbuterol. So let's
Mm.
jump into clenbuterol, albuterol, and ephedrine. I think these are going to be the only ones that are really predominant and classified in, at least in the bodybuilding world, as PEDs.
Yeah.
There's a lot more stimulants out there. I mean, even caffeine is technically a PED.
Yeah.
So when you it's the same thing. It's compound interest over time. Mathematically, add everything up over time and things just get worse. Side effects become more prevalent. So, for instance, clenbuterol, this is a really interesting one because it works on your body fat burning rate no matter what, essentially. So, you can start off at a very low dose. You don't have to get side effects. It will be working to burn body fat. And I find that linear with stimulants is the best way.
Mm.
Use it when you need it. If you use it in the beginning of your prep, you've shot yourself in the foot where your brain isn't going to have a stimulant response. And all that you're doing is you're taxing your adrenals, you're bottoming out your cortisol, androgens are involved. So think about every single stimulant that you add to the equation adds pressure to your adrenals in your kidneys. You sometimes need to take a break in the middle of a prep from stimulant use to make sure that you can utilize it at the tail end of the race. Think about it as like nitric oxide at the tail end of the race. I think about androgens as the same exact part of the equation. Use it when you need it,
Yeah.
get the results you need, get the look you need, get it out of your system.
Mm.
And that's the smartest approach that I see. So 6 weeks of something like a clenbuterol is really where I see it most effective. You can start low, you can slowly increase. I see no reason ever to be over 100 micrograms of clenbuterol. There is no, if you're running over 100 micrograms of clenbuterol, something's just wrong. Remember what I was just saying? It's clenbuterol and yohimbine are the, I'll lean into yohimbine too.
Yeah.
Clenbuterol, yeah, so in conjunction, like that's what I like in conjunction is clenbuterol and yohimbine.
Yeah.
Now, people have asked me how to run a yohimbine, and everyone's going to be completely different. Some people can't run clen, some people can't run yohimbine. It depends on actually your genetics. Like that's actually an epigenetic and a genetic thing, as well as how healthy your adrenals are. If your adrenals are shot, you might not even be able to utilize either of them. So clenbuterol is going to hit your beta receptor in the brain. Yohimbine hits your alpha receptor in the brain. The easiest way to think of clenbuterol is you're putting your foot on the gas pedal. So think about how hard you can put your foot on the gas pedal for how long. Well, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Yohimbine is like taking your foot off the brake. So that's the easiest analogy. And I actually got that one from Scott Stevenson. So I'm just going to give him a shout out. Credits due where credits due.
I like
And
that.
yeah, it's the best analogy to use. And you've only got an allotted period of time. So there's a time to put your foot on the gas. There's a time to take your foot off the brake, and it's go time. The really nice thing about the beta receptor is there are ways to reset it. There are ways to resensitize it. Actually, Benadryl is one way to do it. However, I will let you know right now, when you take the time off, there are more natural ways to approach helping your adrenals in a very short period of time. And one great way to help your adrenals is taking time off of doing crazy cardio, 2 hours of cardio a day, whatever your coach is having you do, which is usually 2 hours. There's a point of diminishing return, by the way, with cardio. A very good point of diminishing return. And I really like walking. So if you throttle back on cardio, go for a walk outside, get some sunlight on your skin. In the UK, that might be a little bit more difficult, but
touch and go.
Yeah, try to get what you can. It makes a massive difference for helping out your adrenals in a very short period of time. There's L-tyrosine to help with mood support. There's 5-HTP to help with mood support. If you're something like an L-Dopa, which is not legal in every country, sometimes it is a pharmaceutical. In fact, I think in the US, they just made it a pharmaceutical recently. Things like that before bed, improving it's taking sleep aid before bed is the best thing you can do in a prep. If you're not sleeping, you're not getting peeled. End of story. That's going to be the most predominant thing that you see with adrenal insufficiencies, is the fact that it impacts your sleep so much. And then androgens definitely directly impact your sleep as well. So everything kind of adds up everything adds up together. It's all a formula and it all compounds up. You need to let your foot off or put your foot on the brake sometimes and let your foot off the gas to make sure that you can put your foot back on the gas pedal. So there's a very good time to actually take a break completely from training and doing cardio for a few days during prep to just let everything and your cortisol levels come down, your inflammation come down. You also get a really nice snapshot of like, what is their actual weight at this moment in time? And that's another great thing, is that's really good data.
Yeah, weight fluctuation in itself. What a fucking mind warp. It is. And actually, you know, as in my category, bikini, and a lot of the female categories, I touched on this on a pod not long ago. You don't get weighed on stage, but we're so obsessed with scale weight that it becomes like almost in your mind, and I'm guilty of this. I've competed for years now, and you know, particularly at the start, I would monitor my progress by scale weight. Now, you spoke about inflammation, training, etc. You can do leg day and put on like 1.5 kilos, right?
Yeah, that's actually probably the average that I see with women is between 1 to 1.5 kilos after, and in pounds, that's about 2 pounds of inflammation, sometimes 3 pounds of inflammation, just from storing glycogen, just from storing lactic acid. It's a lot of weight, and the bigger that you are, the more weight you're going to hold. For me, I would go to sleep. And this is me like training 3 days a week and eating 3 meals a day. Like I'm basically retired. I literally will wake up 10 to 12 pounds lighter in the morning. Now I'm still over 200 pounds, but that just goes to show. And then if you mathematically put that into a woman, then you're looking at sometimes 6 pounds, 8-pound difference, depending on how big the woman is. It's pretty crazy. It's definitely a mind switch, and you have to literally turn off your brain and let your coach do the thinking for you. With men, you have to worry about weight caps, and that's really the big. So sometimes from a mental aspect for these men, you actually have to get them below weight cap so they're comfortable and they stop stressing out, or else you can't drop body fat on them. Other ones, if I have the option, I'll bring them in 10 pounds, 12 pounds over weight cap the day before, and I'll be like, you're going to be fine. I got you. And then like, I'll just pull them into weight cap. And that's how I got Damien's Olympia qualification. He would always be sometimes almost 20 pounds over cap the night before, and we pull him into weight cap, and we always came in the biggest. Everyone will always walk up and be like, are you going to do open bodybuilding already?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to like when I watched the new Arnie documentary and things like that. They're very chilled, and you know, obviously training hard and you're putting effort in there, but the chilled athletes, the ones that walk around, like I was speaking to an athlete at the weekend, I was like, you're a sloth until you get on that stage. Just relax. He was wearing his yoga pants and he was, and when he came on stage, when you get on stage, that's when you bring it, giving out all your energies before you go on stage. Like you've already fucking worked yourself into the ground. Just chill. But the stress thing is massive. And I know myself, internal stress, physical stress, all of these things that accumulate. And then, of course, PD use. I mean, maybe we could talk about how that could cause some scale weight fluctuation as well.
Yeah, I mean, PEDs alone, like I'm just going to keep it very stupid simple here.
Yeah.
With PEDs, technically they're anti-inflammatories for the most part. However, you're going to retain more weight on it. And the reason being is you're going to have more skeletal muscle glycogen. So you're literally storing more carbs convert to glycogen and they store in the muscle tissue. With glycogen being stored, you get water. So it can be 5 milligrams of Anavar. I've seen on some people being like 2 pounds, 3 pounds. If you're adding growth hormone into the equation, which is a bioidentical, it's technically a protein, but every IU of growth hormone I see about being 2 pounds, which is crazy to even think about. Even on a woman, I see almost a 2-pound influx, not just a man. So that's a major mind shift for people to understand. If you drop it all out, guess what happens? All that stuff goes away. That's why all these people that look like they're massive and they come off of their gear and they lose all that inflammation. Well, the cells are getting smaller. You're storing less glycogen. All that water starts leaving the body. And the crazy thing is you're going to feel softer. Why? Because it was predominantly stored in muscle tissue, at least for the androgens.
I really like actually what that reminded of what you said earlier about getting particularly males down to like a TRT and then they perform better. I had this conversation with another guest and he was saying, he speaks to people that are on 800 tests or more. And then he's like, right, we go down to 200-300 and they perform better, they look better, and then you can titrate up. But it's definitely a misconception. And actually a funny story, when I first got into bodybuilding, I said to my mum, I'm going to be a bodybuilder. You probably won't know her, Jodie Marsh. She's like a model over here in the UK, and she was a bodybuilder, but she was clearly on gear, right? And my mum had this vision that I was going to suddenly turn into like an actual female bodybuilder. And she was like, are you going to take that stuff? And it's like, no, mum, I'm just going to start natty and see how I go. Now, in that note, I normally recommend that someone does at least one natural prep first, unless maybe they get into it and they're like, I want a pro card in 5 years. That's that. What would you do if someone was looking at going down this route?
There's a lot that comes into this equation. How old is the person? Is their brain fully developed? No one talks about that anymore. Your brain's not, as a male at least, your brain's not fully developed until you're 24 years old, usually 23 to 24 years old. And you can change the chemistry of your brain permanently. And these young guys, at least, are starting way too early on. Now, women develop actually a lot quicker than men at a biological level. However, prepping for a show naturally, I think, is great. Figuring out if you enjoy it, figuring out if you enjoy being on stage. And this doesn't mean that you need to win your show to be like, oh, I lost, I hate this sport. No, step on stage for fun. See how you do. See if you like the process, because dieting down is not easy. The funny thing about this sport is everyone wants to be a bodybuilder. It's not no one wants to lift this heavy ass weight. No one wants to diet hard. Like everyone wants a pill. Like they're like, oh yeah, can I just take clenbuterol and be shredded? No, you can't. You can't take Anavar and be shredded. If one, it's not even a fat burner. It can directly affect your metabolism, but Anavar is not a fat burner. It's there in the medical world to prevent muscle tissue from wasting. Most anabolic steroids are there. Now they have different uses, osteoporosis, stuff like that. Even burn victims use Anavar for wound repair. So there's a lot of Anavar is a really interesting one actually in the medical purpose, but I think it's a great idea to prep naturally. It depends on your age as well. And it depends on if you have the genetics. You need to be realistic with yourself, because some people have the genetics to go straight to the Olympia stage within a very short period of time. Some people, you won't know if your genetics are even good for almost a decade. And that's hard for people to understand. And I've said very outlandish statements like, if you're a wellness competitor and you're not going to squat over 315 pounds or at least a rep max of 315 pounds, you're not going to be a good wellness competitor because you're going to have to lean into heavy androgenic use.
Yeah.
I highly don't recommend it. And I had some wellness pros commenting and liking it. And then I had some people DMing me, hey, I think you need to clarify yourself because I turned pro, blah, blah, blah. I know I was coaching a wellness pro that was natural. However, she was a 365 plus pound squatter for reps. My wellness athletes don't need really much at all. Why? Or nothing. Because they're squatting over 315 pounds, meaning they're going to keep their femininity. That is where the division that you should fall into is, what are your genes looking like? Now, from a overall life standpoint, it should be, how do you want to look 99.99% of your life? Because even if you're pro, you're on stage like 0.1% of the time max your entire life.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that you have to come into the equation, is like what your genetics can do. Also, you don't also know if you're a hyper responder to androgens. I'm actually a hyper responder. I actually just ran my labs. I sent it to one of my clients because he's just on TRT, and we got some labs run. And then I'm so lazy with my TRT that like I'm 200 milligrams a week. And then some weeks I run 100 milligrams because I skip a shot. I happen to run only 100 milligrams of testosterone the week before. I ran my labs, and my testosterone score mathematically came back at a 2,500 count nanogram per deciliter, which, by the way, is like absolutely insane. Like people can run like 500 milligrams of testosterone sometimes and not hit that marker. And I was 100 milligrams the week before. My total serum levels were probably maxing around like 150 milligrams. And it was already half-lifing out of my system. And then my free testosterone is literally double over the score. And my SHGB levels were almost so low, they were just high enough to where I could still shuttle the androgens through my system. And I sent it to him, and he's like, holy hell. He goes, this is absolutely insane. And all my other lab markers were like textbook perfect. So that just goes to show I probably would never need a lot. That's another reason that people need to take into the equation, is when it comes to androgen use, I really like hard data. I really like labs to see what is truly going on under the cover. Everyone's like, they're waiting to come off androgens to run their labs. Run it while you're on, see what's actually going on. That's one thing I don't understand. Now, you want to run it when you're shutting everything down to see where your baseline is back at. But you need to know how you're responding to certain androgens, especially if it's an androgen that you're going to reintroduce later on, whether it be Anavar, especially women with testosterone. Oh my gosh. It's so popularized right now to do HRT. It bothers me so much. HRT, I'm not opposed to it. Know where your testosterone conversion ratios are. Like that's a major one. What does 3 milligrams do? What does 5 milligrams do? Can you even tolerate 10 milligrams? Does 10 milligrams, do you not respond well to it? Things like that are extremely important. What's your estrogen conversion at certain testosterone levels? If you're not on testosterone, what are your natural estrogen and progesterone ratios? These are all things that you need to know before even running any type of androgen. But it's definitely something that you need to know if you are also running androgens while you're on androgens before you even go to add other things into the equation.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, funny you say that. I actually smashed a bottle of my fem test, and I was like, fuck. And spoke to my coach, and he was like, well, actually, why don't we take it out for a bit and then do blood? So I've got my bloods next week, and I'm actually having them before my next exposure. So I used Primo for 2 exposures, one in prep and one in my growth phase. And actually, I don't know if you've had experience with this, my periods were so heavy and so painful since introducing Primo. So we're actually looking at Anavar for my next exposure, but I'm running bloods first. Bloods is the message here. Like when Austin comes on, pretty much we end every pod saying, if you've got anything from this episode, please get your bloods done. Because I don't know about you, but I get people saying, I mean, you work with high level athletes, but I can't afford to have bloods. And it's like, it's so important, you know?
Yeah, if you're going to, someone asked me about natural versus enhanced athletes and how often you should get your labs run. As a natural athlete, minimum once per year, you need a snapshot in time, especially if something's going on, get your labs run.
Yeah.
As an enhanced athlete, really 3 to every quarter, so 3 to 4 times per year is a great thing. Now, if you're a woman, you might be able to get away with a little bit less because you're probably not going to be exposed to as many androgens as long as your coach knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely important. Now, Primo affecting your menstrual cycle and making your periods heavy. Well, Primo was used for breast cancer as well as Masterone. Those are the 2 androgens that were used there that aren't used in market anymore. And it's going to reduce down your estrogen level. That's why it was used for breast cancer. So heavy bleeds, it's probably due from the lower estrogen levels, and then also is probably reducing down your progesterone enough. I would guarantee you that you probably have something very similar happen with Anabar though, because it's going to lower down your progesterone levels. So the number one hormone that needs to be involved and prevalent within a woman's body for a dieting phase is you need enough progesterone. Progesterone is an energy metabolism hormone, which is something no one talks about. So not only are you going to feel better, but your periods are going to be better. You're probably not going to lose them as frequently. Hopefully you don't lose them at all. Most of my women don't even lose their periods. It's not saying that you have to lean into bioidentical progesterone, but sometimes using natural compounds are phenomenal and it works really well for some people. And it depends on how healthy you are. If you're really healthy, natural supplements work very well. And they should be deployed no matter what. There comes a certain point where you're bringing a knife to a gunfight and the gun's going to win every single time. So sometimes you need to lean to actual hormones on that note. And that's just something to notate is probably your progesterone's coming back low, but your estrogen's probably coming back low as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get bloods. It really excites me, all of this. Hence why I went down the assisted route in the first place. I think for me, I got to a point naturally where it was like, I want to bring back some excitement. It was like, oh, I'm gonna go assisted, and it is very exciting for me. And getting bloods done, of course. Now, we spoke about Clen not long ago. I'd be interested to know your take on when someone comes away from prep and they go through the reverse out and into recovery, growth phase, however you format it. Would you put merit on having, if you're on a higher dose of cleansers, maybe you were on the 100, would you titrate that down, or personally would you take that straight out on the reverse out?
Sure. So with clenbuterol, by the way, I won't even go close to 100 micrograms with clenbuterol. I just don't find it necessary. To be honest, 60 micrograms seems to be the maximum threshold that's really ever needed. 80 has been a very rare case. And then
Is that male and female?
With males, I found a rare case that 100 micrograms ever needed. 80 seems to be maximum threshold with a male. Now, taking into the reverse equation, are you talking about androgens and clenbuterol or just clenbuterol? What are you talking about?
I mean, I'd quite like to hear about both of them, your take on it, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So when you're reversing out, the number one thing to take into the equation is your thyroid is downregulated no matter what. You've been dieting down. There's been some form of metabolic adaptation that has occurred. The first thing that you want to do is try to get your hormones online as optimally as possible. If you're not on HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, if you're not on testosterone, if you're not on estrogen, if you're not on progesterone, or if you're not on testosterone or progesterone, whatever's scripted to you, the process is a little bit different. So I like to reboot not sex hormones, and if thyroid hormone was involved, you keep the thyroid hormone in if you were doing replacement therapy. If thyroid hormone wasn't involved, then immediately what I do off the rip is I do sex hormones and thyroid hormone as optimally as possible. So this involves with diet. Carbohydrates are amazing for thyroid. Even whole cage-free organic eggs, which are super expensive, they're amazing. Seaweed is high in iodine, amazing for, now it's not a common diet thing unless if you're Asian to have seaweed in the diet, or Australian, sometimes they do it as well, but it's super high in iodine. So that might help with thyroid or T3 conversion, which is active metabolism. So that's the thyroid front, is really getting fed up, not too quickly to store on body fat because you can't utilize those nutrients too well. On top of that, if you go too quickly and you can't shuttle those nutrients and you start building up basically junk in your gut and you start building up bad bacteria, that's the optimal time to build up gut dysbiosis. So be very careful, have your day or 2 days maximum Be very careful with having way too many sugars. This is what I always try to warn people about. One, they're super addicting too. So people that tend to like sugars, they just keep eating sugars, and next thing you know, they have gut dysbiosis, which I've seen over and over again. So that's the thyroid front. So if thyroid hormone's involved, it's minimum 2 weeks, minimum, sometimes longer, it depends on the person, before you remove it. When it comes to stimulant use, that can be a very different one, where most, and it depends on how healthy you are, I can pull out stimulants right off the rip. I usually titrate down on the caffeine, depending on how the person is. I implement as many natural nootropics as possible to support their adrenals. Something that's super cheap that helps with adrenals is vitamin C, which is, everyone sleeps on vitamin C and how effective it is for your adrenals. Basically, you're treating the kidneys at that point. And also sleep. So sleep for the adrenals. So that's if you're immediately removing stimulants out of the equation, and then start titrating down on some of the stimulants so they don't have withdrawal symptoms. When it comes to sex hormones, again, the adrenals are going to cover one base, and then you need to cover the ovarian to pituitary axis way. So there's a lot of supplements that can help there. However, some women have a much harder time here, and that's one reason why you do want to track her in the off season to see how resilient that axis way is. So the cheapest bang for buck supplement, in my personal opinion, for an ovarian to pituitary axis way is inositol powder. And there is a ratio one. Avostol has it in it, and it's dechironinositol powder is involved with the inositol powder, the bioinositol powder, and it helps with the ovarian to pituitary axis way. And that's kind of like the best bang for buck supplement there. So I always try to talk best bang for buck. It's funny, my clients are always like, how much is it going to cost for supplements a month? Because they know I'm super heavy on natural supplements. Anyone that knows anything about me, like, I'm very, very heavy because I'm very effective with natural supplementation to improve lab work. And I do best bang for buck, end of story. I'm not going to write down a million different supplements that I don't think are needed. I'm going to do the most effective for the price that I can, depending on what your budget entails. And I think that's important for any coach to understand. So those are kind of the things that I do there for a reverse. If androgens were involved, if there are side effects involved, it's time to address things, but those should be honestly addressed while you're getting ready for the show. Hair loss should be prevented. Thyroid down regulation with proper dieting should be prevented to the best of your ability. Insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity should try to be improved to the best of your ability. But I'll tell you, if you're not trying to keep someone insulin sensitive during prep, you're not going to get them peeled out. And the hardest thing for a woman to get peeled is going to be progesterone and insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance. So mastering that has been the two biggest things that I have done, which has taken me thousands of reps of prepping people to really start nailing this down. And I'm constantly learning something new, reducing down inflammation while in prep, reducing down cortisol in prep, figuring out a training protocol that every single person can handle, which every single woman's going to be different in what their stress response is on a physical level. So, and then some people, they actually pulled the gym right out coming out of a prep. I actually usually wait, and this is a John Meadows thing actually. He would wait usually like 4 to 6 weeks. I usually wait 6 weeks, which is usually where he would wait. And then you pull the gym out and you give a deload and you're like, go on vacation. And that's more of like a life thing than anything else. And you drop down the cortisol, you drop all the inflammation, they come back refreshed, their thyroid's in a good spot, and now they can really start growing.
I actually love that, because a lot of people say have time off the back of the show, and I've never done that. I like to keep, for me, if anything, mentally, like, I've had restrictive past, like self-restriction and stuff like that, and that wasn't from a good place. But I love training, and I want to go and do a bit of the gym. You know, you've had a meal after your show, you've got some energy, albeit it's not that much, but even just going to do like a bit of a pump session or whatever, and then have that period, and then look forward to a deload and going on holiday. And I pretty much did exactly what you described there. for me, someone telling me not to train after a show is really difficult. I love training, so I'm very glad you said that. It's like finally someone agrees.
Yeah, and everyone's going to be a little bit wired differently. Some people are completely worn down after a show and they legit need time off. And the best thing to do is you rip them out of the gym and you say, go for walks outside. And that's it. Like I almost always 100% drop as much cardio as I can that I'm
Yeah,
comfortable with. A lot of coaches don't do that. A lot of coaches, like they'll throttle back on the cardio a little bit because some of these coaches have their athletes at like 2 hours of cardio a day. I just don't feel
yeah,
that that's necessary. The most I'll ever have an athlete at is an hour and a half actually. And
yeah,
it's in split sessions. And
yeah.
it's not a common scenario. It's really if you know that you have gas left in the tank and you can really gas pedal down hard and their body can hold up resilient wise. And if you do that, you have to throttle back so much on training because you're just going to bury the athlete. Especially if someone gets sick in the middle of prep. Like that's another thing that's actually really complex is when someone gets sick in prep.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think sometimes as well, isn't it just that maybe the athlete needs more time to bring condition, and actually a lot of athletes will go, fuck that, I don't want to do it for longer. Then it goes back to sort of what I was saying earlier about, maybe you're not doing it for the right reason. For me, if I've got to do an extra 4 weeks because I'm not ready, then I'm doing another fucking 4 weeks.
I think that's a really good point, and I can actually tie androgens into this equation again. So remember, we were talking about dosage and duration over time.
Yeah.
One reason why I don't like saying like everyone's like, oh yeah, 8 weeks of Anavar. Well, are you going to be ready in 8 weeks? Like, are you actually going to be ready in 8 weeks?
Yeah.
Do you have another show coming up after? Are you qualifying and then you're doing another show after?
Yeah.
Because that increases the duration and the dosing over that period of time.
Mm,
So I just find it effective to titrate and
mm,
be more conservative or wait until later. I've had athletes not even start anything until 4 weeks out from their show. So I think it's really important to know when you actually need it. And I've utilized Anavar for just the mechanism of action of freeing up thyroid hormone, not even using it for muscle sparing, not increasing muscle glycogen in the tissue, none of that stuff in a very, very low dose where they're not going to have any side effects and just using it for the proper mechanism of action, which is why it's so important to understand what androgens are, what they do, what they're effective for. So, and you were bringing up primo. Maybe your estrogen was running low before you were running your primo. But
yeah.
I've also seen where data on paper does not relate to relativity. I've seen women with low estrogen levels that run primo and they just hyper respond and melt through body fat, get tighter, put on muscle tissue. And it's like the most wicked thing ever. And on paper, they should respond terribly,
Yeah.
terribly, and they just hyper respond to it. So
Right.
that's another thing.
Well, like you said about genetics, isn't it? Everyone's an individual. And also, I found a heavy correlation with sporting background. So, a lot of swimmers, gymnasts, dancers do very well in the sport. A lot of the successful athletes I speak to have got a sporting background and then they've got good genetics as well. And then they kill you. You mentioned earlier, being on an Olympia stage within a year. And I know people that have done that, but they've got that individual makeup. And of course, social media, you look on there and you think, oh, this is cool, I'm going to look like that. And it's like, actually, as well, the PED use thing for me up in the awareness is for people that listen to the pod or look on Instagram, see athletes that are using PEDs but maybe don't talk about it. Be realistic with your own capability in the sport. And you touched on that earlier. It's such a relevant point.
We have someone that's number one in the world that's a natural athlete, and she's been number one for a very long time. Sid Gillen. She was a track star for a long time. Some of the craziest genetics I've ever seen are actually black track athletes.
Yeah.
And it translates very well. And I think one reason why also track translates so well is the psychological aspect of it, of when you're running track or you're running long distance, which usually it's track, it's sprinters, not long distance runners, but you have to push through this wall over and over and over and over again. And when you're in prep, I try to tell people, well, some people are going to hit their wall at 8 weeks out. Some people are going to hit their wall at 6 weeks out. But once you hit one wall, you're going to keep hitting walls and it's going to get hurt more and more. And is your body going to let you get through that wall? Is your mental going to let you get through that wall? Can you turn off your brain when things get really painful, when it hurts to walk, when it hurts to sit down, when you get winded and feel like you're blacking out when you stand up? I used to have to get helped off the couch this last prep. I couldn't walk for the last 3 weeks. I got literally actually a virus 3 weeks out from my show. I was peeled out 4 weeks out, like striated glutes, grainy, probably the leanest I ever was actually in my bodybuilding career. When I was with John, I was really peeled out too. And I got literally sick. I was sitting next to someone at a show and I ended up getting sick and I couldn't shake it and I couldn't walk for multiple days. And we took 3 days off of the gym and 3 days off of cardio. And I was still having to get help off the couch because that was that wall for my body that said, hey, we're not going to let off. And I wish I could have done the national show that was going to be 4 weeks afterwards. I would have been perfectly fine for that show. But unfortunately, I had athletes in my class and I wasn't going to do that. So I stepped on stage to the best of my ability, still first call outs in men's physique and classic. And, you know, I consider myself a good athlete.
Yeah.
I could probably have gone to the top of the level when I was 25. I was 240 pounds fasted and 250 pounds walk around weight at 5'8". Yeah. And I was classic in doing 190-pound weight caps. So that's another thing is I got big very easily.
Yeah.
Women need to be realistic. What are your glute inserts? I think so with women, I think once you develop enough muscle tissue where you can tell when you get lean enough where your inserts are, that's going to dictate how far you can really go in the sport. Not saying even with bad glute inserts, you can go pro for sure.
Yeah.
But if you can go to the Olympia stage and your glute inserts are just not good, that's a good indicator for where you can go. And if your glute inserts aren't good, maybe figure is the way that you need to go. So that's a huge factor because shows are one from the back every single time.
Yeah, for sure. Turn to the back, ladies, and stay there for 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned before we jumped on, maybe we could wrap up with talking about the different areas across the world and PED use. You said we could maybe cover that. I think that'd be quite interesting because I've never spoken about this before.
Yeah, no one's really talking about it. So let's start off with the US. And I like the wellness division because it gets so extreme. So this is a really interesting topic. So I don't know how much your viewers are going to be able to relate to this, but I think it's going to blow some people's minds. So I'm going to talk about the wellness division. So what's being prevalent right now within the US is the SAFE method where you're trying to lean into bioidenticals, growth hormone, insulin, well, maybe insulin, maybe a metformin. I actually prefer berberine over metformin.
Oh, do you?
Something to resensitize the insulin receptors, potentially L-carnitine, anything that you can utilize to upregulate the androgen receptor. And then what you pair into the mix is some type of testosterone. Some women with testosterone are perfectly fine, and most people don't know how to utilize progesterone, so they just do testosterone, and it's like TRT. It's not even HRT. Then on top of it, you stack in and you kind of look at it almost like a male cycle where you're utilizing a Primobolan of some sort to really control some estrogen. And then things get a little bit crazy with some of these coaches where I've been hearing popularized as Anadrol being utilized at the tail end of preps, which actually in the medical world, they do actually use Anadrol with women. So because of that, I think people feel like it's okay to use Anadrol. It could be utilized, but the issue is like when you get overdose Anadrol, things take a turn for the worse very quickly. It's kind of like getting fake Anabar, where you implement Anabar and it's dianabol. Things take a turn for the worst very, very quickly. So proper dosing is a massive one. So Primo is being utilized and dosings go up very high there. It depends on obviously the coach and their moral values, but once you break 150 milligrams across the board of androgens, masculinization is bound to happen at some point in time. It depends on the woman, but it will happen at some point in time. Now, that's not saying 150 milligrams of testosterone, because 150 milligrams of testosterone, you're going to virilize very, very quickly. Like, you're just going to masculinize. And the starting dose for masculinization and converting a woman into a man is actually going to be 20 to on the low end, and usually it's 30 milligrams of testosterone for converting a woman into a man. So that's just something to take into the equation when you hear these dosings. And I've seen TRT clinics actually script literally 100 milligrams of testosterone to a woman, which is straight up going to turn that woman into a man at some point in time. And it's going to happen very quickly, actually. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, that was literally scripted from a hormone replacement clinic. Now, that clinic will probably get shut down because that's a massive lawsuit. That's a massive medical liability. Now, so Primo Anavar is being used, Winstrol is being used, Anadrol is being used within the US. And it depends on the look that needs to be brought to the stage, and it depends on the person.
Mm.
But a lot of coaches are pushing too hard, too much, and masculinization is just bound to come, whether it's now or later. And a lot of these women are going to be sick. So Primo is probably the safest one that they're using, and Anavar being second safe. I say safest in quotations, again, messy subject.
Yeah.
Testosterone, in my opinion, should be reduced down if you're implementing other androgens to just reduce down overall the androgenic side effects that are going to become prevalent.
Yeah.
And then Winstrol, I do believe in over a 3-week sense of time, it's becoming too much because you will virilize very quickly from Winstrol. And I'm going to snapshot away from the US and I'm going to go into the Brazilian market. I think one reason why Winstrol is so heavily used in the Brazilian market is because Anavar is so hard to find real down there. And that's a hypothesis. I'm not 100% sure. It's a cheaper drug. It's easier to find. Anavar is a very expensive compound. So that's why most underground stuff is fake. It's just so expensive and it's faked for a Dianabol. So test your stuff for sure. Especially Anavar and Primo are the two that you need to test. Like those are going to be the ones that are faked most heavily. Like 95+% of Primo is going to be fake. Now, going into the Brazilian market, you have Winstrol being utilized, you have Tren being utilized, you have Equipoise being utilized. The dosings on these are sometimes higher than I took personally for my last show, which was 800 milligrams across the board of everything. And that was at the end. So, and then obviously I dropped actually testosterone out. So it was even lower at the very end. But Tren is being utilized and Equipoise. I hypothesize that Equipoise is being utilized within the figure realm in the US a while ago, 20 years ago or so, and you started seeing the masculinization of these women. The bone structure started changing, especially their jaw lines, their vocal cord changes. Equipoise might as well be viewed as testosterone. The only difference is that it's going to reduce down actually your estradiol, your E2 levels, which is the most active form of estrogen, and it's going to produce a lot of E1. So it'll actually pull down your estrogen levels, whereas testosterone will convert into estrogen. That's the biggest difference between the two. However, it might as well, you're taking testosterone, testosterone-derived drug. I've seen a woman at 600 milligrams of Equipoise per week, 100 milligrams of Tren, Anadrol and Dianabol being alternated between 50 to 100 milligrams. And I actually reversed all the damage that was being done. I don't know how damage wasn't done there. However, I wasn't even taking on athletes at the time, and I was like, let's see if I can fix some stuff. And I actually they had Graves' disease actually, and I put the Graves' disease into remission at the same time. I wasn't even trying. I don't even think she told me that she had Graves' disease, and I just put it in remission by treating all the other symptoms and the inflammation and all this other stuff. So Brazil, those are the drugs that are being utilized. Winstrol, I'm seeing dosages as high as like 50 milligrams, which is a male dose. That's enough for a male to start feeling like their tendons feel like they want to break in half.
Yeah.
And it's for like months. Like Winstrol is being used for months. They do not care about the femininity. It's quite unfortunate. And they're trying to catch people like Francielli, who's probably not utilizing much at all. And these Issa but she's in Miami and she's probably utilizing nothing at all. These women are just workhorses and genetic freaks, and they've been doing this for a long time. But everyone's so impatient, they're trying to snapshot themselves into the future rather than staying feminine. And one major piece of wellness is being feminine. One major piece of being bikini is being feminine and being a representation of femininity. Taking it over into Europe, I actually don't know it's being utilized that much in Europe. I would assume it's similar to Brazil because they're trying to obtain a certain look and they're not really sure how to obtain that certain look. One, really, it's about having enough muscle tissue and being absolutely peeled out of your mind. Now, Winstrol, though, within the wellness world is super interesting, even in the women's physique world, the figure world, because it actually affects the collagen filaments. So it will actually literally thin the skin so it can help obtain a certain look that most androgens wouldn't be able to do. However, it's extremely effective in very, very, very low dosages, and the exposure time does not need to be long. It's almost like overnight difference when utilizing it. And that's really what I'm seeing within the world. I think that some people are utilizing halotestin, which I think is stupid to utilize. Again, it's like doubleizing the dosing. Things would take a negative turn for the worse so quickly. T-ball, by the way, for you women out there, is a cheap man's Anavar.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's just a cheap man's Anavar. I mean, like, it could be definitely be utilized for sure within a woman. It was, but if you look at the history of a lot of these drugs, that's where I love looking at the history. What was it invented for? T-ball was invented to pass a drug test for the Olympic athletes for long distance runners.
Yeah.
Anavar is extremely effective at what it does. So honestly, like, Anavar can be used for osteoporosis. It can be used for literally skin repair, like burn victims to heal their skin. It can be utilized for muscle wasting diseases. The dosings actually in the medical world, and this is not for women, up to 100, well, maybe for burn victims. I'm actually not sure if they utilize this with women, like what the maximum dosing that they've ever scripted, but 120 milligrams per day I've actually seen it's for burn victims though. And it's for a very short span of time to try to repair as much skin as possible, which is like crazy to even hear, because when you're taking a drug to enhance, it's very different from using it for medical purpose. Like, the drug is so effective that if you have a muscle wasting disease, it will prevent you from wasting muscle tissue. That's how effective these drugs are.
It's like Clen, isn't it? It's used for asthma.
Yeah, it's used for asthma,
Yeah.
but that's why it's an amazing performance enhancer. In fact, anything that bronchodilates is probably some of the best performance enhancing drugs to every sport ever. And the other one that's translates into almost every sport that's super effective because it's so good for recovery is actually insulin.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
everyone thinks,
get the pumps.
yeah, in the pumps. Yeah, I made the joke.
Yeah.
People were laughing about the pumps. Insulin's really unique because everyone thinks that insulin, you're going to take insulin and you're going to become a diabetic. It can
Yeah.
actually prevent you from becoming a diabetic, but it's a slippery slope with women, right? Like, insulin resistance can lead to like PCOS like labs
Yeah.
if you're insulin resistant. So one thing that is very common that's also not talked about is abusing androgens and having androgen induced PCOS. It's not real PCOS. It has been literally induced by the lifestyle and the PEDs that you've been taking. And a lot of women are coming out like, I have PCOS. Well, there's two things, like you have to have 2 out of 3 boxes checked for PCOS, but a lot of it's literally self-induced from honestly poor coaching within the sport.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that your women are staying as insulin sensitive as possible. That's like the best way to improve performance is literally insulin sensitivity, where you're utilizing your nutrients better, especially carbohydrates.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? Actually, when Matt, my partner, describes it to people at the gym about how insulin can be beneficial, their first thing is, oh no, I don't want to get fat. I'm going to be big. And it's like, this is not the route. And sometimes education you give to certain people, and actually similar to our talks today, you can give all the education you want, and some people just want that quick pill or whatever it is to jump forward and progress quickly. But we'll probably end it here, where bodybuilding isn't maybe the sexiest thing when you're doing it day in, day out. It's maybe not the most exciting thing, but if you love it and you do it for the right reasons, it can be, right?
Yeah, it's honestly brought me to the point in my life that I'm at today where I feel a sense of freedom, a sense of relief. I'm okay taking a step back from the stage and living the next chapter of my life, that's a whole topic of conversation for another. It's definitely a depressing thing because I've been doing this for over a decade.
Yep.
And I was on track to being really good. Got really injured. It was at the point where I was out of the gym for like 4 to 6 months, where every time I stepped foot in the gym, I would just get depressed because I couldn't train properly.
Yep.
And you have to become okay with that. So I think during your journey, one thing I would highly recommend doing is having a hobby outside of bodybuilding, not just going to the gym, even if that's building a business, right? So literally anything that's going to keep your mind entertained, reading books, something that you did before bodybuilding, just so you can be in touch with reality outside of bodybuilding, because you get so hyper focused on one thing. that if you have a well-balanced life, you'll enjoy the journey, because it should be more of a lifestyle. And then when you're ready to get on stage, you get on stage, because it's a very slow journey. I'm going to tell you that right now. Building muscle tissue is a slow journey.
Yeah, for sure. I'd definitely be interested in getting you on to talk more about maybe the mental health side of things as
Sure.
well. It's something that we both are quite passionate about from our own journeys, it sounds like, but also helping others. Thank you so much for today. Like, this is better than I expected. And if people listen and they resonate, want to follow you, any of this type of stuff, is Instagram your main place and platform that you use?
So crazy enough, so Instagram is my main place, and that's dynamite_D. However, my gems are all on YouTube. I have like thousands of hours of videos on YouTube. And the reason why I started my YouTube channel is, one, I posted I'm gonna say C19. I posted my C19 protocol to Instagram and got banned where I couldn't post videos anymore. And I might as well be illiterate, where I'm auditory learner. So I speak a lot of my content.
Yep.
And I created my YouTube channel literally so I could post that protocol and I could send it to clients if they got sick with it, because it helped with all the symptoms. It was talking about things that weren't talked in the medical community, and I hypothesized how to fix it, the symptoms, as well as getting rid of it. And it all the information started surfacing within the next 2 years. And I hypothesized it before people were actually getting sick with it. So I started that YouTube channel because of that. And then the second reason I started it was actually because of John. He couldn't post about PEDs, and he was covering everything else besides PEDs because he had children. So because Meadows couldn't post about it, he would sometimes actually plug into my YouTube channel and be like, dude, that video is awesome. And it's funny because some of the original content I was producing was so much more complex than it is now. I try to make it as digestible and regurgitatable as possible, or else it doesn't help people. So a lot of coaches started following me back then because the information I was put out was so detailed, and people were like, dude, I know my stuff and it's hard to keep up with you. And so I got better at articulating myself over time. I try to make it as simple as possible.
So on YouTube, is it Dynamite D as well?
YouTube is actually David DeMesquita. All my platforms are my actual name, which is David DeMesquita, which is DE, and then it's spelled like mosquito with an A at the end. So that's the easiest way to spell it.
I'll put it in the description as well. But if anyone listens, wants to tag us in the stories, etc., then I'm sure you're here for it, like I am, David. So thank you so much. You are an absolute legend, and yeah, such a good episode. Thank you, mate.
No, thanks for having me on.
See you later.
See you later.